This is episode number 53 of DevOps Paradox with Darren Pope and Victor Farsick. I am Darren.
And I'm Victor.
And in a non-video recording, we're going old school today with just audio. Today being 6 a.m. my time today, at the time we're recording. The topic for today, in everything that's been going on these past few weeks, we've seen, especially in the US, I'm not sure over in Europe, but we've had calls from certain places. I'll just go ahead and name it. From the governor of New Jersey, their unemployment benefits system was written in COBOL. And they didn't have people to maintain it, and they were having lots of problems, and they were asking people to come and volunteer to write and fix whatever COBOL program issues they were having. Now, number one, why COBOL? We'll talk more about that in a minute. My second part to that is, come volunteer? Really? You want somebody that's maybe already retired or unemployed to come work for the unemployment office? Isn't that a little strange?
And most likely that system requires that person to be physically present around the system, right?
Probably not remote working friendly, if I had to guess. Yeah, I mean, it's okay. Now, there are people that wouldn't mind because they may be retired, and it's like, oh yeah, I'll go back and just do something for a couple of weeks, right? It's sort of like doing a hackathon for a weekend, right?
Yeah, but let me repeat what you just said, just to see whether I understood. Basically, government or whomever is asking, doesn't have people who know the system and the language that are not retired. So it's asking retired people who are actually the people most affected with the current situation and in most danger to come and help fix the system and potentially put themselves into danger.
There is a chance of that, yes. Because
kind of like, if you're 40, 50, kind of, yes, you get infected, but it's not that likely that something will have long-lasting effects, right? You're retired. You're in tough spot.
Yeah. Now, I was semi-bashing on COBOL. Now, if you're a COBOL programmer, you're actually worth a lot of money. I can't remember if I talked about this on the podcast or if it was just speaking with somebody else. I was at a client, I think it was late last year, and I was talking to this kid. And by kid, I mean he was 24 or 25. I was like, so, what are you doing here? He says, well, I work in the mainframe group. I'm a COBOL programmer. I went, what? Now, he had the general look of a programmer from the 60s or 70s. He already had the long ponytail. He was already, except it just wasn't gray, right? It was still normal colored hair. I went, why did you do that? He says, I'm set for life for at least the next 40 years.
Exactly.
Because my company will never move off of mainframe and they will never leave COBOL. He says, and if they do, I can learn something else because if I've learned COBOL, I can learn anything. So COBOL as a language, I don't have a problem with COBOL as a language. Most of the problems with the whole cover is COBOL on certain pieces of hardware that cannot necessarily scale because it would cost too much to scale it. That's part of it anyway.
Even bigger problem is that is a symptom of a different issue, and that issue is that there is that very, very short-term way of thinking that, yeah, we just need to fix this, we just need to do that. And then you end up in a situation that, 30 years later, there is the differences between your system that hasn't been updated or improved or anything for 30 years and then what you would need to do to put it up to speed today is so big that it doesn't even make sense anymore to adopt any other strategy. Kind of like, if you're on mainframe, then the only option you have is actually to keep using it because the gap is so huge that it's close to impossible to move on.
Because you could not bring in your favorite fill-in-the-blank consulting firm and rewrite that in a weekend.
Exactly. Because you don't have enough manpower, you don't have enough knowledge, you don't have enough the docs, you don't have enough vendor support, you don't have enough of anything that is required for you to take such a complicated task. And changing a system drastically is a huge task, unless we're talking about some tiny system. Now, I always have that same logic. To me, that's similar like when upgrading, let's say, operating system of a server, right? If you jump one minor version once a year or twice a year, that's not so complicated. If you have an operating system that hasn't been upgraded for 10 years, then it's very tough, right? Simply because making big jumps is complicated. But if you don't make any jumps, then the only option you have is a big one.
So let's talk about a couple of other things that I've seen that are sort of in the same vein. At the time we're recording, today is Friday, April 17th. This is going to be releasing on April 29th. So by the time you're listening to this, this has been old news. But in the States this week, there were stimulus checks sent out, and the first big wave happened on April 15th. Funny enough, which is typically tax day in the United States, which has been delayed this year. But people started checking their bank sites to see if the stimulus check was in their account. Well, what started happening around midday U.S. time, wherever midday was, probably, between 11 and 1 p.m. Eastern, people on the West Coast were waking up and finding out and checking. Bank sites were going down left and right because they could not handle this enormous influx of traffic for a simple read-only call. That should be a simple read-only call.
Yep.
Right. I'm being opinionated here, but people were saying, "Hey, I need what's my most recent 5 deposits?" Right. That's effectively what they're looking for. It's like, what's my most recent deposit?
Exactly.
Or last 10 transactions or something, whatever the case may be.
I can understand that in that situation, banks didn't have kind of like already everything ready. Kind of, we are ready for any disaster that can happen in terms like kind of it's already scaled up and or whatever is needed. That would be unrealistic. But what is again a symptom of something very bad is that they're not designed that they can adapt to a change when it comes. Like if I understood right, and correct me if I'm wrong, at least I think that I've been hearing about stimulus checks coming for weeks now. So basically, we had weeks, let's say a month, between knowing what will happen and that something happening. Right? Now, the real question is whether a month is enough to adapt to something or no. And for many companies, it's enough. Like many companies need a week or a month is plenty to adapt to change.
I would say for the retail financial sector in the States, that answer is no.
Yes.
It's 3 to 6 months at best, because they have to get everybody around a table and get their managers of their managers of their managers around a table, and just so they can decide when they're going to have their meetings to start discussing what they're going to do.
Yeah. Probably that month they're still discussing what will be the date of a meeting to to think about it.
Right. Now, what would be interesting, because I have worked with some smaller regional banks, like not like city, county type size banks, right? You know, the really super local, hyper local banks. But I've worked with some regionals that aren't like the majors or the mid majors. And I haven't checked to see how they fared. Because in those scenarios, because when I've been to their places, their corporate headquarters where all the developers are maybe 100,000 square feet, maybe. I mean, not a huge facility if you think about a corporate headquarters where everybody is working. So to me, it would seem like there might have been some that would be like, oh, this is coming. We might ought to consider that we're going to have a lot of people checking on this day. Right? And do we feel like we're okay? And at least you would have made a measured calculation. But maybe not. I don't know.
I mean, logically speaking, I can only assume that the bigger you are, the more levels of decision makers and management you have, right? Because the major problem usually in those cases is how long does it take for you to make a decision? That's usually the most painful part. Mm-hmm. And when I say decision, I don't mean decision like we're going to be able to handle that, but the decision, also technical decision, how you're going to do that, all different types of decisions before actually John, I'm inventing a name, sits down and does it.
Right.
So, and that
now it might only take John 5 minutes to do it. It might just be a simple thing. But how many months or years have occurred before John sits down and does something in 5 minutes?
Exactly. Or for all we know, maybe John actually already did in that fictional bank solve the problem, but now it's waiting 57 approvals to get to production. Maybe there is a fix waiting.
Right. And has been waiting.
Yeah.
But it got out of queue because product owners were fighting to get their other features out first.
Yes.
You never do that as a product owner, right?
Let's not go there.
Let's not go there. Okay. I might edit that out.
No, it's okay.
I'm going to move on to a different one. There is what is his title? So I saw this tweet from Kieran Healy, and I'm sure he's not listening, but I'm sure I butchered his name at the same time. He is a professor of sociology at Duke University in Durham, North Carolina. And he had a tweet that I'll include the link to, the date, I don't even see right now, but sort of during this time. And he said, quote, "If they cannot believe a ton of government HR infrastructure still runs on COBOL, wait until the cool data science kids find out just how much of their machine learning, AI, and model fitting kits sit on top of a bunch of Fortran libraries."
But those are two extremes, and then I like that tweet. I'm not sure whether that was intentional, that tweet, but it actually talks about both extremes. That we have systems that are rotting, and then we wonder why they don't work after 30 years of negligence. And then we have also cool kids that don't understand that the world did not start yesterday. And that everything is kind of like starting today. We're going to design everything from scratch. We have no legacy, no business before yet today, right? And then that's maybe equally dangerous as just as a negligence.
Well, I think it's beyond dangerous. I think it's crazy. I can't think of a better, bigger word. But usually what happens, and I was going to mention this when we were talking about the banks, and they're trying to get people figured out, okay, who's going to do what? Well, usually there's at least 1 to 2, maybe 3 consulting companies also involved in all these things that have their own priorities to make sure that their contracts keep getting renewed. And you ask a consulting company, hey, we've got this system, we need to make it better. Most consulting companies, unless you're a long-haired, gray-haired, ponytailed person, is going to say, well, we need to replace it with the cool new hotness, and we need to get rid of this old new fartness. I made that up. Right? They're thinking that just because it's COBOL and mainframe that it's horrible and needs to be replaced.
Yes.
That may or may not be true.
Yeah. I mean, it really depends. That's one of the biggest dangers I think that companies are facing, is that it's really hard to understand the internal and hidden motives of companies that you're giving power to manage your business. Like a consulting company can be like the one you explained, but also it can be a vendor that is trying to actually has a very strong interest to keep your mainframe because they're the only provider of the hardware of that mainframe. So kind of like you have those competing interests that are pulling you in different directions, and none of them is actually working for your own interests. Unless you really know what you're doing. But you cannot know what you're doing because you externalized all that know-how. So you have no idea. You just need to trust those companies, and those companies are giving you opposing advices.
Yeah, and that is the dangerous, because I've seen that pattern happen a lot. It's like, oh yeah, we're just going to outsource that. It's a legacy system to us. We'll just have somebody maintain it. We'll pay them a retainer fee of a few $1 million a year, and that means we can open up 2 tickets a year to have words changed on the screens.
Yeah, and when the time comes to do something with that system, let's say improve it one way or another. Let's say right now scale it. Then you don't have that knowledge because you decided that does not matter, and then it suddenly does.
I also think, and this, what we're talking about here also falls into this. Most companies, I'm going to say this as a broad statement. This may not be true everywhere, but as a broad statement, most companies do not know how to quickly triage, which is, especially in these days, you have to have a first responder mindset. You can't have an upper A agile or upper W waterfall mindset.
But it's not only mindset. It's, for many companies, it is impossible to quickly triage because of what we just spoke a few minutes ago. Because if you have 75 different providers working on different aspects of your system, and you happen to need to triage something that affects many of them, then realistically, you can never be fast because you need to go through all those different levels and companies and all that stuff before you get any feedback. It's kind of like you cannot triage fast anything. You cannot do fast anything unless you're in control of that something. And I'm not advocating that every company should be in 100% control, but that's simply something that needs to be understood. If you're not in control, you cannot be fast.
And you have to be okay with that. When you chose to not be in control, you chose to give up flexibility, power. Because if you offshored, and I don't mean offshored, but you got it outside your 4 walls offshored, however it physically happened, your primary customer service system, if you're a bank, it was mainframe. We've moved on to the new hotness, that's this thing called Java. And we've offshored the COBOL and mainframe stuff to somebody else. Now you need something fixed immediately for that. Well, some of the contracts I've seen for people that do that kind of work, it's literally, 7-figure, 8-figure deals. You get to open up 2 things a year and that's it. And if you want this emergency thing, great. There's a force majeure clause in there too that means we can charge you whatever we want at whatever rate, and you have to pay it up front before we do anything. That's mafia tactics.
Yeah. And that's in case that you don't need to involve lawyers, which you often do need.
You always have to involve. You always have to involve lawyers. So, is there hope? Is there a way to solve this problem, or at least plan for solving this problem?
I mean, there is, I think we know how to solve that problem. It's just that it's very hard to convince companies. I mean, it's not necessarily bad to have a provider for part of your system. It's just which provider you're choosing. Like, I can argue actually that there is no conceptual difference between, let's say, IBM, and I'm just using them as a name, and Amazon. Right? They're both providers that are managing part of your system one way or another. The major difference is that one is actually allowing you to be in control and working in a background to enable you to be in that control, while the other is mostly focused on tell me what you need and I'm going to do it for you type of stuff.
By the way, the former was AWS and the latter was IBM, just in case you weren't sure which way it was.
I mean, I don't want to pick on any of those. It can be anything, but there is a difference between using a provider that is specialized in something and it helps you a lot without actually preventing you from having control. And the other one is simply, okay, give me 1,000 people. Put 1,000 people on this problem and solve it for me. I don't want to know about it.
Right. But what you just said there, give me 1,000 people, just solve it. I don't care. That makes you an irresponsible business owner or business leader.
I would say that's partly inertia, because I could understand that logic being true, let's say 20, 30 years ago, right? Because we didn't know how to do stuff. The knowledge how to do stuff well was not so widespread. Whether you have a website in 80s or 90s was not really mission critical, and so on and so forth. But the needs today are different, and then people are trying to fit those needs, business needs, into the models that are used from the past.
Right. So let's use the website example. That was a great use case to hand off, because if you didn't have something at all, you're taking this as an experiment, an R&D type thing to see how it works out. And you don't have those skill sets in-house at all, that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, realistically, why would you actually put your core effort into something that is going to be useful to maybe 3% of your potential customers, which is websites in 80s, right?
Yeah. But what are the analogs to that today? How does that play today? What is the website of the 80s today?
There is no such. Let me think. An office. Bank office would be equivalent to the website. It exists because, when I say office, I don't mean where bankers work, but where I go to. I think that's becoming equivalent of website of 80s. We're just doing now having reverse effect.
Yeah. It's funny. We keep hammering on the banks, but we can hammer on numerous company types.
Even better. Okay. Banks, I can see people going into an office and I can see the need for that. That is diminishing but still existing. Show me a person, find me a person who goes to a travel agency.
Very few.
I still see around my house there are like 3-4 travel agencies. I never saw a person over there except the person working. Or insurance company. When was the last time you went to some office and said, "Can you please explain me the options I have for my insurance?"
This is sort of a macabre story, but when I moved back to North Carolina, my father's wife, her sister or cousin or something, her family has an insurance company. And it's like, hey, just call them up. They'll get you set up on stuff. They'll give you a friends and family rate. And it's like, okay, whether they did or not didn't matter. It's like, it was easy enough. That was 2007. I have never been to their office. I might have talked to them on the phone once or twice. I never met them until my dad's funeral. It was just one of those things of, it didn't need to. That was 16, or no, I can't even do the math right now, 11 years. So, and everything's been great. It's like, I know I can reach them if I need to, but I don't need to go to see them.
Exactly.
Is there any hope? Is there any hope? How do we help people start to think differently about, because we talked about COBOL, we've talked languages, things like that we like to poke fun at. It's not the languages. It's the technical debt that has accumulated over time. This is where the time factor of technical debt has really hurt people.
Exactly. I mean, you can build the best possible system anybody can imagine right now. Give it 10 years and it's going to be in the same state as whatever you consider legacy today. If you treat it in the same way, of course.
Right. I said, I'm going to go a little on the edge here. Let's say I know I'm introducing some technical debt right now, and I'm doing it with a full conscious that I'm doing it. Yeah. But I also know that in my next sprint or the sprint after that, no later than that, it's going to be removed.
But it's not.
But then it's not. Let's say, but if it is, then you've planned for it. It's sort of like okay, maybe it's like doing a payment plan. I could pay everything. I could pay $300 right now, or I could pay $125 a month for 3 months. I'm going to pay more because I'm having to carry that debt with me for 3 months, but then in the end, I'm done. But most people just keep paying, and they keep saying, well, 125 is too much. I just need to pay a penny. And it's that interest is going to start overcoming the principle on it.
But that might be partly the danger where we are in, because most of businesses are these days publicly owned by many people, shareholders and all those things, right? Which by the nature, and I would do exactly the same, are looking for quarterly goals, right? And if it's a quarterly goal, then realistically, none of the things that we are speaking about now that should be done can be done, because they don't fit into that time frame. Like, for example, if you take IKEA, and I'm taking them just as a first example, and I'm not saying in any form of way that they're doing things right, but for example, they're a huge company that is fully privately owned by 2 people or something like that, right? And they can say, okay, look, this might be an interest for me to do it on a 3 years time frame, right? Because doesn't really matter. I mean, this is kind of like it's like my home, right? Kind of like I'm doing things that are on much longer run when I repair something than only for this month. It's a similar thing, like, and I'm going now too far, like the problem that we potentially have in politics. And just to clarify, I don't want to change it, but since we have, in most of the countries, we have 4 years mandates for presidents, prime ministers, there is no interest for any of them to do anything that might be beneficial longer than that term. And I'm now not advocating the dictatorship or anything like that, just to clarify. But it really, I think it's very important when you look about how a company operates and which type of decisions they make, is to look at the time frame that matters for them, whatever the time frame is.
Yeah. Because one of the things that you'll typically see, especially when new leadership comes in, is they have their first 100 days. And there's usually two types of people in that. The first 100 days means they're holed up in their office and they're ordering new paints, new paintings, and putting in new carpet. And that's the first 100 days. The second type, which is I hope most of them, are actually getting out on the front lines and talking to the people. The people that are working for the company, the people that have been there maybe for 5 months, and other people have been there for 50 years. And understanding what they're getting into. Yeah. When those people get in, it's like, okay, they're not going to know everything in 100 days. They've basically read the introduction page to The Art of War, right? That's all that they've done. So how do people get beyond that tech debt? They have to realize that it is truly a debt. And even if they think they're paying no interest on it each month, they are.
Oh, yeah.
And it goes back to, we'll come back full circle here. New Jersey was looking for people to come in and volunteer their time. COBOL programmers to come in, donate their time to fix the unemployment system.
But you know what is the real question to me? This will be fixed one way or another. Either because it will take more time, but eventually it will happen, or one way or another, right? But now, what is the chance that this incident will not be forgotten the moment this is resolved with some workaround?
Oh, it will be completely forgotten.
Exactly. So 3 years from now, 5, whatever that period, something else will happen, not as a disaster, but something else will happen that will change the needs of that system, and there will be exactly the same conversation as we're having right now. Exactly the same. And the system will be in exactly the same state. And we will wonder again, how did this happen?
And even more COBOL programmers will be dead by then.
Exactly.
Literally dead.
and those that are not are getting even richer than they're getting right now.
Than they are now. Exactly. Okay. It feels like we're just scratching the surface on this topic.
It's kind of strange because, and I might be wrong because I'm not that involved in the rest of the industries that exist in the world, but I have the impression that other types of industries are less negligent than we are. If you take, I don't know where you are, let's say that you're in San Fran, right? That bridge over there is being, from what I've seen, short time I spent there, it's being maintained and kept all the time. Nobody waits until it starts cracking. And
like Seattle. I saw a note this week in Seattle that they are going to close down. Let me pull it up real quick as we're doing this semi-live. The West Seattle Bridge will stay closed from 2020 through 2021. And some people, even their state DOT, Department of Transportation, are saying it may not be fixable and may have to be completely replaced. Right? Because it hasn't been being maintained.
Yeah. Then also replacing also makes sense. You just need to make a decision. Yeah. The problem that I feel that we are having is that we don't make those decisions. We don't make a decision to maintain, and we don't make a decision to replace. Both options are okay. You're just not okay not to make any of those two.
Yeah, here's just one quick line here looking at one of the news sites from Seattle. City engineers had been documenting cracks first discovered in 2013. And then it goes on to say some other things. But so they've been documenting that there are cracks in the bridge for 6 to 7 years.
Oh my. Okay. I take back what I said when I said that others are not in such a bad shape as we are. So I'm taking it back.
Yeah. There's still, but again, this is still, I would assume this is government type things. This isn't financial, but it could be financial. So anyway, I'll stop right there. If you thought today's episode was interesting, thank you. We appreciate that. I'm glad you thought it was interesting. This is a big deal. If you're in a company that is doing these types of things, you either are set for life for a job, or you need to run as fast and as far away from there as you can. And if you're listening via Apple Podcast, now Google Podcasts. Google Podcasts came out with an app that runs on both Android and iOS. So if you're fed up with Apple Podcasts, now you can install Google Podcasts. Now there are others too, but that's going to become another big one. But regardless, if you're listening, go ahead and subscribe and leave a rating and review. All of our contact information, including Twitter and LinkedIn, can be found at devopsparadox.com/contact. And if you'd like to be notified by email anytime a new episode is released, you can sign up at devopsparadox.com. The sign up form is at the top of every page. And there are links to the Slack workspace, the Voxer account, and how to leave a review in the description of this episode. Now, also, we tend to do a live stream. We try to do at least one live stream a week outside of this. That's sort of a ask me anything except for CI/CD on whatever's going on. So we'll talk about bridges and COBOL and everything else and those things. But the only way you're going to find out about that is to join the Slack workspace. That's where we post the notifications, or you can follow Victor or myself on Twitter, and we'll usually post when those are. But they've typically been happening on Friday afternoons Eastern time. That would be evening Europe time. We may end up switching those up some to give Europe more midday, but who knows? That also means I'd have to get up at 4 a.m. to do these things. I don't know if I'm that dedicated yet. Because that means I have to get up and shower before then, because I have to at least look semi-presentable. Or not, I don't know. Any final things about the world of technical debt?
It just keeps increasing, like any other debt.
And at some point, that debt will overtake you.
Or you're going to declare bankruptcy, right?
And then start over creating more debt?
Exactly.
I hope not.
But it's kind of, it's so cool. It's so much easier to start accumulating debt from nothing.
Yes, because then you have what you think is an unlimited ceiling.
Exactly.
Okay. Thanks again for listening to episode number 53 of DevOps Paradox.